Where we left off in our teaching on trusting God in turbulent times, I want to talk this morning about the difference between accepting God's purposes in your life and aborting affliction. That there is this constant temptation we have in a world where we are instructed and inculcated to pursue personal peace and affluence, rights and pleasures. The mindset that produces in such a context is the idea that everything ought to be fine with me, and there's this temptation, I fear, to try to eliminate any pain whatsoever, including relationships, aborting anything that's inconvenient, whether that's physical abortion or whether that's another form, and aborting that which seems too hard, too dull, too exacting, something that's too demanding, something that ties me down too much is the mindset. I've heard people say this, for example, one fellow in ministry. He justified his basically leaving his wife because he felt that she was kind of a weight around his neck. And he felt that he couldn't do as effective ministry because of this. So he justified doing that in order so that he could have a more effective ministry. There's something wrong with that picture, as you can well imagine. Perhaps his ministry was supposed to be more to his wife than he supposed. You see, the danger is that people get this picture of what life ought to look like, and then they try to sustain that in spite of anything that begins to become contrary to that situation, anything that really moves us around that idea. So we'll do whatever we can do to keep it going. Scott Peck, in his well-known book, The Road Less Traveled, talks about the fact that life is difficult. In fact, I think that's the first line in the book, that life is difficult. And it's the idea that accepting that, coming to understand that we're not here really just to have a lot of fun. In fact, as I've told you many times before, you've got to embrace the truth, especially from a biblical point of view, that you're not home. And that this isn't really the tearless, painless world of heaven. And that obedience to God will not necessarily lead to comfort and to pleasure in this world. That's pretty evident if you look around the world. The greater level of persecution now than ever before. Peck wrote, once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. He says, most do not fully see this truth that life is difficult. Instead, they moan more or less incessantly, noisily or subtly about the enormity of their problems, their burdens and their difficulties, as if life were generally easy, as if life should be easy. You see, when you come to life with the presupposition that everything ought to go your way, you're going to be seriously disappointed. Years ago, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book on death and dying, and this field that was called thanatology, from the Greek word thanatos, which means death. And she looked at the responses that people go through, various stages in the process of dealing with one's mortality and recognizing that their lives are terminal. And while there can be some quibbling about this, there seems to be at least some truth in these processes. Often there's a denial, whether it's death or whether it's a painful situation or whatever, that you're denying that it's really happening. Then you move from denial to bargaining. You know, the idea that, you're trying to equivocate with God to make deals. You know, I'll do this if you do that, is the mindset. Then the stage of anger, when you see that the bargaining's not really working your way, and the idea that you're frustrated with something that you can't satisfy. There's something that's a block. And anger often, by the way, relates to blocked goals. And so we find that unrealistic goals and blocked goals often produce anger in our lives. And the goal has been blocked. And then the fourth stage may be depression, which is a symptom of both prolonged anger turned inward and guilt as well. Often depression for some people is inward anger. It can just be turned inward. Then she speaks of a final stage called acceptance, realizing that it is, and it's going to be this way, and I need to deal with it according to reality. Now again, it's not always a lockstep procedure in that way, but there is some truth that we often wrestle with God about the process He's taking us through, and His desire for us is that we come to trust Him enough, to believe Him enough, to embrace Him enough, to realize that what He does allow in our lives is going to be for our good, even though it may not make any sense to us. And real victory, really, is only possible in the face of a real battle. And we need to remember that you and I are in a spiritual warfare. What are the three battlefronts again in this warfare? You know them. The world, the flesh, and the devil. Those are pretty powerful war fronts, are they not? The flesh is the internal one. That's what's in us. That's this capacity that we have in us to continue to try to make life on our terms and to try to find meaning in our terms, to violate God's purposes in our life. And we have this disposition, this capacity. Even though we may be followers of Jesus, we can still slip back into the same kind of beliefs and behaviors that we had before. And the flesh is an internal thing. If that weren't bad enough, and that accounts for a good deal of our problem right there, to be honest with you, the devil made me do it isn't really necessary in most cases. I think we suppose that we got some kind of direct satanic attack. It's not always, you're actually maybe complimenting yourself too much. The fact is, a lot of it's just down to our own pull and our own disposition. However, the world is an external force, not an internal force, and it amplifies the power of the flesh by giving it opportunities that it otherwise might not have. And so we are in a world that seems to give us a barrage of opportunities for the flesh to indulge. More, I believe now, through technology and a variety of other things, than ever before. So it's a very, very difficult context now to live and to really maintain a fidelity and a call and a purity of thought. Chastity, for example, does not mean that you are single, but it has to do with a purity of thought. And that's why I often say that the thought life is really the key. If the thoughts are right, the actions follow. But wrestling with that and dealing with those issues is, I think, a very important one. At any rate, we have the third battlefront, which can be a demonic force, that there are forces in this world. Genesis to Revelation does talk about the fact, and I believe this. I believe the more serious you get as a follower of Jesus in pursuing Him, if a person wants to go for broke and follow Him, I believe then you become a danger to the enemy. And the more that occurs, the more you can expect a spiritual warfare from that battlefront. And I think you need to be just aware of that. But that is actually something that is a good thing, because it shows that if there's a struggle, if there's a battle, that you are engaged in something that's very real and very vital. I was up in Chattanooga a couple of weekends ago, and we did this marathon of The Lord of the Rings. It was Friday night, we saw the first film, and it was the extended edition as well. And I introduced it, and then at the first intermission, I made a lot of comments, and then there were responses. They had 25 guys who were willing to go through this, endure this pain. And then we went and did the second half, and then we discussed that. And we had dinner breakfast the next morning together, discussed things, and lunch and dinner, and so it was quite an elaborate thing, because we saw the next two on Saturday, and it kept us going from 8 in the morning until about 6:30 at night, and then we had dinner together. So this was an elaborate deal to tell you with. I predicted that out of the 25 people who started, there'd be at most 10 or 11 who remained. That was about right. Most of them, he who endures to the end shall be saved, and most of them did endure almost to the end, but many of them then slipped out. But I have to say, it was a powerful, and those of us who stayed for the whole thing found it to be a powerful emotional experience, because to see the three as they really meant to be seen was very awesome. And one of the things that I guess was struck by, once again, is this whole metaphor of warfare, and that there are so many spiritual truths. And of course, Tolkien, being a